What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Mina channel. Today we're gonna be doing an interesting video that I've been trying to do for some time, and that is actually ranking all Persona 5 Royal Palaces or dungeons within kind of like the spectrum. Now, originally when I started doing this, I was just gonna do a regular ranking, 1 through 10 or whatever, but I decided that it was a better idea to analyze each dungeon individually and talk about them, and then just kind of put in an order whether to S to D rank, kind of where they fall and everything like that. And obviously this is my opinion, so feel free to make your own. There is a tier ranking list in the description that you can make, and you can tell me which ones you like, and so on. I will not judge just the dungeon itself, but things like the music, the themes that they went for, what was going on at the time story-wise and everything. Needless to say, this is spoilers, so if you have not watched or played the game, please don't watch this video. I don't want to spoil the game for you. Anyway, let's go ahead and start with this video. So, number one is actually the most interesting one, and that's Mementos. Now, Mementos in story-wise, I feel like that's one of the, in theory, should be the best dungeon, because the way that the story makes Mementos is basically, Mementos is where the subconscious of everybody's palace is everybody's other side where things happen and everything. It's the reflection of their hearts. And you will think that Mementos, the theme of Mementos being this kind of subterranean Tokyo train station that just goes from town place to place, connecting the rest of Japan together, I think, in a sense, is really interesting. Theme wise is one of the best dungeons. I think that it makes perfect sense with the themes, it makes perfect sense with what they're trying to do, it makes perfect sense with everything that goes around the themes and story wise. However, the execution of the this particular dungeon is very poorly executed. It reminds me, it gives me nightmares of Tartarus from Persona 3. Now, you guys know, if you're new to the channel, you may not know, but my favorite Persona game is Persona 3. And going through this dungeon one more time, and now going through Mementos, which is exactly almost a carbon copy of what Tartarus is supposed to represent in a sense, is very interesting. In Tartarus, in Persona 3, Tartarus is a tower that represents kind of like the desires of people, in a sense. It's a very different kind of desire, which is completely different from this, so I'm not going to get into the spoilers or anything like that, but it's a similar thing. The Midnight Channel in Persona 4 is a very similar concept as well. All of them are exactly the same kind of world, doing a similar reflection to our inner selves and so on. So without spoiling, I feel like Mementos is a really good idea, really poorly executed as a dungeon. However, some of the redeeming qualities is that it helps for the grinding. It is really efficient when it comes to that. A lot of the quests that you do in Mementos to different stuff is really interesting, and some of them have mini stories and everything like that, which if you actually follow through to them, they're really cool. I really like that aspect of that. However, again, gameplay wise, it can be boring, can be a hassle, and it can be one of the least enjoyable parts of this game. Personally, I will say that Mementos will be a B rank for me. Is in many sense should be an S rank again, because it is team wise I love it, but other sides I don't love it too much. Music wise is one of the not very interesting soundtracks in the entire game. I think that Mementos soundtrack, which you can actually hear right now, it's not very fun. There's many renditions as you go to the Mementos up and down and so on. However, Mementos never really clicked to me as one of the best soundtracks there. I thought it was very mediocre and that kind of stuff. It left many to be desired, especially when you're spending so much time in Mementos. Mementos is the dungeon you spend the most time in the game, so it should be one of the best tracks in the game, but it's really not. Moving on, the next one is gonna be actually, for some odd reason, I'm gonna skip this one for a little bit because I have a lot to say about this one. Next one is gonna be Kamoshida's Palace. Now, how am I going to rank Kamoshida's Palace? Kamoshida's Palace is a really interesting palace because it's the first dungeon that we have in the series. In many different aspects, Kamoshida's Palace is, I believe, is one of the most well-constructed palaces because, one, it feels excellently handcrafted. Everything is there for a purpose and a reason, and the reason is to teach you the mechanics of the game. It's the first palace that want to teach you how things work, and now with the grappling hook, it has some things to your advantage. There's many different sections to the game. There's some cut pathways that you can do a la type like the Dark Souls style, where you kind of go from one paint and you pop up at the beginning of the area and everything. There's many different aspects of this game that really made me think, wow, this is a really nice palace. The soundtrack's actually not bad, and I think that it really does match that tone of the palace itself. And what is really interesting is the concept of the twisting a school, which is supposed to be where kids go and learn, as a palace, because the Kamoshida thinks of it as a ruler of the palace, as a person in charge of it and everything. It's really interesting concept. I really like the way that they were able to craft all of that stuff. They have all the different sections, how he himself as a king, and how he perceives all the different students and everything, all the different twisted aspects that you see, kind of how he sees the female students as well. And I think that this is one of the interesting, really representative of the theme of that particular palace there. And the music really matches the tone and everything. Anything bad to say about it is this palace can be long because of certain puzzle aspects that they added into games. Guys, Persona does not need puzzles. No Persona game really ever needed puzzles. Persona 4 added some aspects to that, but it wasn't to the extent that Persona 5 did. And that was one of my biggest gripes with this game, because these games are really long as they are grindy as they are. So adding the puzzle aspect doesn't really help in any kind of way to me. Other than that, I think that is a really good palace, and again, I really like the soundtrack for that. I may give this one an A, because I do believe that this is again a really well constructed palace that really matches that theme. Plus, thinking of the Phantom Thieves as kind of sneaking into a castle to steal the treasure from the bad guy and everything is kind of like a really good way to kind of say, yeah, this is kind of, it's getting you started into, it's getting you hot blooded into that aspect of it. Really like the palace. I think just again, some of the puzzles were kind of dumb and didn't really make sense to the aspects of the story and everything, but story wise it makes perfect sense, so I really liked it a lot. Moving up next, I think the next palace from that one is actually gonna be the art palace. Now if I can find my mouse here in a second, I will continue with this one. Okay, so the art museum. Now the art museum is a really interesting palace here that I kind of want to touch base on a little bit on. The concept of the Phantom Thieves, and some people may not be acquainted with the context of it. The Kaito, which is kind of the Phantom Thief or Joker in this case, is kind of like the mysterious masked man that goes and steals for a particular reason. Really reminiscent of a lot of different stories, but particularly in Japan is kind of like a story type, a storytelling type. It is used in their media a lot. It's something that we don't probably see as much in the West over here. However, the concept of him going to a palace, in this case a museum, and stealing art or something like that is very cliche in a sense, but it makes sense because of the context of the Phantom Thieves, and it makes perfect sense. Like, that's something that needs to happen for a Phantom Thief. Like, that's one of the things that needs to happen. So I like that they were able to implement this into the story. However, particularly wise, I think that this is the most forced palace out of all of them. This one, story wise, it just doesn't make sense. They just throw you into this random, really weird situation that you kind just go into. Overall, it does make sense that you go into the museum and steal the palace art or whatever for as the treasure and everything, which is, again, makes sense, but at the same time, it's kind of weird that that's what they do. Overall, I think the palace is not very creative in that sense. For a palace that is supposed to be a museum, I think there could have been some stuff that they could have added better. The soundtrack is nothing to write home about, particularly with style and everything like that. I think it was a pretty okay soundtrack. I expected something more special for that, especially because it is a palace. It is a museum, and with museums you can expect something maybe a little bit special for it or anything like that. That doesn't really happen over here. However, I do think that it's an interesting palace overall, and the themes of it were pretty interesting because it makes sense for the Phantom Thieves. However, I didn't think that it was particularly interesting, or in that sense, I like museums and I've seen plenty of museums, so I think that they could have gotten very much creative in this one. Some of the redeeming stuff that I liked about this one, however, is the area where you go and jump into the paintings. You're kind of like trying to find the right path and everything. I really like that. I feel like more of that could have helped the gameplay and everything. Overall, the boss battle and everything, which I haven't talked about in the previous two because of bigger spoilers and everything, I don't know really nothing to write home about. This particular boss was changed a little bit. I like the changes they did for this boss battle. I think that it made him a little bit more interesting as far as the reasoning why and everything. The fact that he kind of clones himself into these other creations of himself with that particular attack and everything. I thought it was pretty cool. I really like that stuff. I think I'm gonna give this one a B as well. Not bad. Again, not a bad palace or anything, but I felt like it had a lot of potential for the fact that you as a Phantom Thief goes into these dungeons that is a museum. It really it could have blown that out of the water, but it didn't, and I'm really confused as to why it didn't, but I thought it was okay. We're gonna move on from here to the next dungeon, and that's gonna be the bank. Now the bank I'm gonna rank in a second, so let's talk about the bank for a minute. So the bank is a very interesting palace that happens within the world. Story-wise, context-wise, it's a really interesting palace because the Kaneshiro, the owner of this palace, sees everybody as a ATM machine, which is kind of like as a way he himself sees as the bank as the person who's getting that money from the ATM people and everything. The concept wise, I think is really interesting, and it's a really interesting twist on like what you expect and everything like that. I thought that this storyline kind of made more sense because of the situation with Makoto and everybody, what they kind of fell into. It still kind of really felt forced in a sense, but I kind of bought that more as like, okay, it makes sense. And you're a Phantom Thief, so of course you have to go steal a bank, right? What's next on the list after a castle and a museum? Would you have to go steal a bank? That still kind of makes sense. That kind of is kind of like almost like a given that needs to happen and everything. The context of it is interesting. I don't think it worked really well, but I think that the context of it pretty interesting. Overall, the traveling in this particular dungeon was very interesting because one, the dungeon itself has the usage of cameras which kind of go in different spots and they can catch you and everything like that, as well as these guards that are going around with guard dogs and everything like that. Very thematic on that sense. I actually worked for a bank before, so in a sense I kind of like see where the spots and everything were very interesting. So I think that the concept of it was really interesting. The music is honestly one of the best soundtracks in the battle themes for the dungeons. I really like the music they chose for this one. Very interesting. It's odd, but this one really had really good theme, and I really liked the music for it. It really worked for me a whole lot. I really liked that a lot. Puzzle wise, and I'm talked about the cameras earlier, which thematically it makes sense because the cameras serve the purpose of catching people from stealing stuff. It makes perfect sense. Opposed to other dungeons, this one made more sense. Now this one goes over a little bit too much when it comes to the actual palaces, when it comes to the actual things that you have to do, the puzzles, because there's so many puzzles. Not only do you have to do these things, there's also these key codes that you have to find and everything like that. There's all this added stuff to it. Sure, thematically again it does make perfect sense because things again like the getting the code so you can go into a vault, that makes sense, and all kinds of stuff like that. It really thematically again it really does make sense, but other than that I don't really think that it worked for me with the puzzles and everything. I felt like almost the end, when you're getting into the vault area and you have to go look for a code and then you have to go again and look for another code and everything, it can drag along and it can really easily disrupt the flow of the dungeon. The flow of the dungeon to me is how effective you feel you're doing as far as leveling up your character and actually reaching parts of the story that are important. I feel like they go back hand in hand because dungeons can feel too grindy or too long, or you're doing mindless stuff that doesn't really add to the experience of it. Puzzles in this case really don't add to experience of it, other than the fact that it makes sense thematically. Sure, it really makes more sense than the other puzzles in other games. This one kind of just is part of the deal. You have to do these things and everything, and I really like that kind of stuff. However, again, in some aspects it can be grindy and it can feel like it drags for too long because you're trying to find the codes and everything like that. Again, that kind of just didn't make sense for me. The boss battle in this one was very interesting. I thought that the whole thing with the piggy bank and everything was crazy, but in a sense it kind of makes sense. And the boss battle was kind of funny. I think that it was kind of one of the funniest boss battle that we had. Definitely not a hard battle at all, but it was really funny. I liked a lot of stuff. I think I'm actually get Kaneshiro's Palace a B as well. I think that it really well executed in some aspects. I think that some things work really well for me, and I really like the music for it. However, again, I just think the puzzle aspects was maybe a little bit too grindy and everything. Actually, maybe bump it to an A here. Okay, moving up next here, we have Futaba's Palace. Now, Futaba's Palace is very interesting because it's different from all the other palaces. Futaba's Palace in this part of the story is Futaba herself has put herself in a situation where she is in this kind of tomb, in this kind of isolation aspects where she doesn't really want to be out of this tomb where she lives in. And there is really interesting the way that we perceive this tomb, because it's not like unlike the other aspects of the story so far, whether it comes to the actual bank or the museum or the castle, which they actually look like museums and they have things that museums should have, or things like the bank, it has things that banks should have, and so on. Futaba's Palace is different because while it is of the Egyptian theme, it is not like an actual Egyptian tomb. There are some things and aspects that are like that, but there are a lot of things that are usually more from her actual imagination. The fact that instead of doing seeing the Egyptian symbols, we're actually seeing code, or just there's a lot of binary code that we see in the story in this particular palace, which I thought it was interesting because she's a programmer and she's a hacker as well, so it will make sense for her to have code and programming in it. So her palace is a representation of what she perceives a tomb will be like in that particular case. Just like any other of these palaces, these are just a reflection of the inner selves. It's just, however, hers, in thematically speaking, is really funny that music wise it's actually one of, again, really good soundtrack. It's really emotional, and I feel like it has a lot of weight to it. I really like that a lot. This one also made sense for it to have some puzzles, because if you ever seen any movies when it comes to like Egyptian, when people sneak in, like thieves for example, in this case they sneak into these tombs, and they are grave robbers, really, you could call them grave robbers, and they go and steal things from that, and you always expect those random weird things to happen. Like in the game, at some point you do this thing and this ball is going across the hall, and it's just like destroying things and everything. That is something that you will expect from a tomb, right? So a lot of these puzzles do make sense. A lot of these things kind of thematically speaking make sense. This one can be a little bit of a maze in certain aspects, because there are some things that you have to go from place to place and everything like that, and I think a lot of this stuff can kind of like drag this dungeon along. However, now there are a lot of revisions that they did, such as the grappling hook and some other aspects. This dungeon actually made it a little bit easier to go through. Originally, this dungeon was a little bit hard and it was a little bit grindy in that sense, where you had to kind of go around to kind of find the next key and everything. They eased it up a lot on that aspect, so I do want to comment into that. I really like the music and the theme for that dungeon. Not only that, but also when you kind of get into further later on the story, and you find out this is her dungeon, but you're not going to be fighting Futaba. You're actually going to be fighting her mom, or an image that she has of her mom as this kind of guardian beast that is taking care of this dungeon and everything. So thematically speaking, I really like that. I think that it was one of the more interesting passes. Music wise, I really like the music as well, and I think it has some really good elements. And puzzle wise, again, you guys, I just talked about the puzzles, but I think that they do make sense in the story wise. Boss battle, I thought it was pretty interesting, very creative, especially when she kind of shows up and kind of helps you out on everything. Kind of shows that she's part of the team and everything. So I like that as well. So I'm gonna give this pass an A, almost an S actually. I think I really like that one a lot. It might even be an S. I might bump it into an S. I think that I really like the presentation of the palace here. The next palace from this was actually Okumura's palace. Now, Okumura's palace was a really interesting palace for many different reasons, and we'll talk about this in a second here. Okumura's palace is a, well, thematically speaking, Okumura's palace is this sort of spaceship. Now, why is it a spaceship? And the first time that I played it, I was kind of like, why is it, what? This is interesting. So, story-wise, in this particular part of the story, Okumura is the owner of this massive chain of burgers called Big Bang. Big Bang has this team of space. Everything is space and everything like that. Obviously, story-wise, you will learn why later on. The man he likes space stuff. You know, in fact, his treasure is a spaceship from some random TV show or something from the 80s or whatever. So it makes perfect sense that his team is gonna be space oriented. I really like a lot of the Easter eggs in this game because it has a lot of Star Trek and Star Wars themes all over it, and I really like that. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I have my helmet right there. So like, we're seeing a lot of this stuff. I know some people didn't really like that stuff. I loved it. I thought it was pretty creative and pretty cool. I think it thematically speaking, it really makes sense for the dungeon to look like that. Now, when it comes to the actual story, thematically speaking, it's so weird to have the Phantom Thieves just go into spaceship and steal a treasure. That is so weird and so random. Honestly, all up until this point, I was like, yeah, all of these make sense in story. This one doesn't really make sense, and it's kind of weird and it kind of forced in a sense because all of the other ones, like I said, a bank, a museum, a castle, a tomb, all of them in a time, like you can see a Phantom Thief doing that. This one is just kind of random, and I don't really know why, but I think it's really interesting as well. It has some aspects that I really liked as well. The music is interesting, not particularly my style of music that I would say like, yeah, I will listen to this all day. I think the soundtrack is not really good on this one. Battle wise, and puzzle wise, this one has one of the more annoying puzzles. Why is this here kind of situation where you have to go to point A to point B and you have to go defeat these enemies to get this password, to get this thing, and you have to do this over again. You go to the next section and you have to do a alpha and beta and gamma, and you have to go over here for alpha and for beta and everything like that. These puzzles don't make sense. They really don't add to experience, and they really lengthen this dungeon quite a bit of time. This is after a revision from Royal. We're not even talking about original Persona 5, which this one had a lot of issues. I had a lot of personal issues with this game, with this particular dungeon in particular. Overall, Okumura's Palace is an interesting palace, and again, I really love the way that they did references to sci-fi and that kind of stuff, because again, I'm a huge sci-fi fan, but I don't think that it really holds up well against the other palaces. Another thing I want to talk about is the boss battle. Now, I'm not gonna say that the boss battle is really hard and you can't defeat it. There's many different ways, and now after thinking about it some more time, there's definitely some more creative ways that you can use to defeat him. However, one thing I do want to say is that this battle seems to be heavy-handed on using a specific type of approach to this battle, and I don't like that. I like boss battles that let you, and it's free, and you have many different ways to approach the battle, and it's really up to you how you want to approach this. And this particular aspect, this one felt more like you have to go do a specific way to do it, and I don't like that. I don't like when games force you to do a specific thing. I think it's better when they let you take your own approach to do your own thing and everything like that. And most games should do that, but this particular palace doesn't. It really expects you to do things in a specific order and a specific way for you to actually defeat it. Otherwise, it just feels like it's a very imbalanced kind of battle. So I can see both sides of the argument here. Overall, I'm gonna rank Okumura's Palace as a C. I think it's probably one of the lowest here. It doesn't thematically speaking, again, doesn't really match with the theme of the other ones. However, I do think there are some redeeming qualities, such as the actual theme of the palace, which is the sci-fi stuff, which I like. That's the only reason why it's not a D, really. Moving up next here, I'm gonna go ahead and talk into the next palace, which in this case is gonna be Saya's palace. So Saya's palace is interesting, and I'm not gonna rank it yet, but I want to talk about it first. So theme wise, in this palace, in this part of the story, is really interesting to kind of see how you've been interacting with Saya so far. Which in this side, Saya is a prosecutor who works for the judicial system, and she has a specific type of skills and something. She's really good at what she does. However, there is something that you need to also consider: is she is a woman. If it's part of the deal here that obviously as a woman she probably encounters a lot of challenges as a woman in the workforce in the kind of place she does, and as good as she is, she has certain things that she wants to accomplish and do and everything like that. And this is a theme that you see throughout her story arc and everything, especially when you get to her actual thing when it comes to the castle and everything like that. It's more about kind of like the chances and everything like that, because she kind of starts seeing that as kind of like she becomes a workaholic, really. That's really her fault and everything like that, which really does corrupt her in some sense. So palace wise, I think this is one of the most interesting one, and I really actually want to catch back up into bring back up what I said earlier. All this time, these palaces have a specific theme. You see a phantom thief stealing this thing. I can see why they did the casino as one of the ones that they talked about the most, and one of the ones that they showed the most, because the casino scene at the beginning is one of the most badass scenes in entire games. Seeing Joker break through the window, kind of sneaking around, and everybody's freaking out, and he's like, I'm coming to steal the treasure, and everything like that, and you actually don't know what's going on. You hear their voices and everything. It is such a cool scene. The whole introduction in this in the first 20 minutes of the game and everything like that is in the casino area, and it's a great opening to the actual game. It shows the mechanics, it shows you some of the cool stuff that you can do in the game, and of course everything about it is just so cool. Now this palace also has one of the best songs in the game. The soundtrack in this one is fantastic, it's phenomenal. I love how good the soundtrack is. This one just is so funky and it's so good. It's actually one of the only ones that have actual voice in them, and I really liked it a lot. I was like, damn, this one is such a good song. I could just stop the game and just listen to a song for some time, and I really enjoyed my song. I was just kind of like, hey, yeah, I love this one. Overall, this game, this particular dungeon, I think is really interesting. It shows you the actual casino and things that she does to cheat and everything like that, and obviously the mechanics and everything around the casino is around you not cheating to get your way into where you need to go and everything like that, which in a way is interesting because you have to cheat the cheater and everything. So I love the concept and everything like that. Again, very original, and it really kind of makes sense with the themes that they're going for and everything. That's why I won't fault it for the really annoying puzzle aspects that this game has, because in this sense it actually does kind of make sense, because her whole thing is about cheating and about not being fair at the workplace, which is how she feels about her job. But at the same time, it's kind of like the thrill of being in the actual court and not knowing the outcome and everything like that. So there's many different aspects of how you can interpret her palace and everything like that. But thematic wise, the cheating and everything like that is really an interesting concept in a casino, because it's that constantly happens. So I think that this is a really good one of the best palaces. I'm gonna actually rank this one an S. I think that story wise, thematically wise, and music wise, one of the best in a row and everything like that. It can get tiresome, especially with some of the dungeon aspects when it comes to the puzzles and everything, but I really do like the game. The dungeon overall thing is really good. Alright, so moving up next here, so we have Shido's palace. Shido's palace is interesting. It's interesting in many different ways, and I want to talk about it for a minute here. Shido's palace, in a sense, is a arc. He sees him. You may see this as a ship, and I don't. I really don't see it as a ship. I see it as an arc. You know, the opposite of Noah's Ark. So in Christianity, the story of Noah's Ark is God goes and tells Noah, "Hey, you need to build a ship and you need to get all these people into the boat because it's gonna rain and it's gonna kill everybody. So you need to have as many people as you can here to save the worthy ones and everything like that." The opposite of his boss is he wants to grab all the most corrupt people that can make money off. He can make money off them and put them in this place. It doesn't matter whether Japan or Tokyo is sinking in. He has his own arc with the chosen ones that he has handpicked into this new era of corruption and money and everything. So it's a really interesting team wise because he is a politician that is running for prime minister in the country. So he's the most powerful person in the country, and he has the most reach and most power and everything. And he has obviously this group of elites that he wants to have to get along with him as he does what he wants to do and everything. So thematic wise, it really makes sense. However, as far as the Phantom Thieves goes, it's kind of weird in a sense to go into a boat for to steal a treasure and everything like that. It kind of really doesn't match up the rest of the other dungeons again, but within the actual story it does make sense because the reasons that I mentioned earlier. His balance is interesting and it's really layered, almost like a casino in a sense, but it's really like layered with different stuff and everything. Many different aspects of the casino that I thought were interesting. Obviously the first couple parts where you're kind of getting into the entrance, you're kind of talking about these people and you kind of hear their thoughts and their secrets, everything that is going on around him and their corruption and everything that's going on. And you can kind of start seeing how much of a scumbag Shido is and how much damage is done into the country of Japan. So in that sense you can see how messed up his plans are, and I really thought that this was an interesting concept. No other dungeons do this except for others that I'll talk in a second, but this dungeon really focuses on kind of putting shit together for you to know how much of a fuck up this person is, and it really builds that up. I really like that a lot. I thought that story wise it was really well written and it made sense and it felt good. What didn't make sense and what didn't feel good is all these invitations that you have to do, which is basically a big giant puzzle that you have to go through. But before you even get to that, you have to go to this giant maze where you turn into rats and you have to go around and everything like that, and then go to another endless puzzle system where you have to go and get to these areas and go to the next area and go to the next area to get another letter and so on. All these parts really feel long, especially when you're feeling that this is your last dungeon. You as the player know that you think that this is the last dungeon the first time you're playing this game. And when you know that this is not the last dungeon, it really drags a lot more because you are in no way interested in building this character that you're gonna beat, and then you have other bosses to go, other things to do and everything like that. This dungeon feels really empty in that sense because it feels like a build-up, which is a good build-up because man, this is the final boss. I am gonna defeat him. I am gonna be done with the story. When you get undone, this is not the final boss. It really kind of drags the story down, and it does feel like it didn't pay off the hard work that you did for the puzzle. Music wise, I thought this was pretty interesting. I don't think it was the best one, but I think the music is pretty good. Thematic wise, it makes sense with Shido and what he does and everything like that. But again, I don't really think that this one was really good in that sense. I thought it was okay. I am curious as far as to how they could have done this dungeon better. I don't have an answer for this one, but I think that maybe the puzzle aspect and all these invitations and everything, although it makes sense, it does feel like really grindy because the game is trying to trick you into thinking this is gonna be your last puzzle, but unfortunately it is not your last puzzle, and that sucks. So I am going to be ranking this one as a C. I don't think it's a really good puzzle. I don't think it's a really good dungeon. I'm sorry, but I do like the themes, and again, it does do a good build up for that. I may move it actually to a B. Okay, so this one is actually gonna be a double whammy for me because it's actually other part of Mementos, which is this one right here. I'm actually gonna rank this one as C because it felt like After you go to Mementos, you have to go deeper into Mementos. And this one is just full of puzzles. It's really grindy and it just doesn't really add to the experience. You really just want to get to the end. And when you find and beat him, and you actually don't beat him, the Yaldabaoth, the Chalice, you just feel like an idiot. You feel like you went through this whole stuff so you cannot beat him again. And it's just I hate it. I don't like the music for it. I think it's easily the worst add-on on the dungeons and aspects, and I feel like it was pretty lazy in that sense, especially with all the dungeons. With all the puzzles in this dungeon that they added. There's a massive amount of puzzles they just added because they needed to add more time to these puzzles, and it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good at all, and you may disagree with me with that. This dungeon boss is also really bad because it's only meant for story purposes. It's not really meant to be an actual boss that you actually defeat, because when you defeat him, he's still alive and he's still out there and everything like that. So it serves no purpose whatsoever. The next one is gonna be last boss that want me here, and he's gonna be a C as well. And I'm actually gonna explain why. So thematically speaking, you go to this, you defeat him. You have to go and defeat him again, now in his final form as a god, that he's been made by the desires of people. I love the theme of the desires of people within this dungeon of Mementos, what happens and everything like that. His final form is pretty interesting. I think his design and everything. What I don't like is how you need to actually go up this area in Tokyo to get to him again, when you actually just went down to the dungeon. So this one is the one where it kills me, because you go down, you fight him, and then it's like, oh no, story happens, and then you have to now go up and fight angels and all kinds of stuff like that, and you have to go and defeat him again. One redeeming quality for this particular dungeon is it has no puzzles. It's literally just going up the stairs, but the amount of a bunch of stuff that you fight and everything like that, it just drags on. Like, why do you have to go through all this again? Story wise, I thought that was an interesting concept, because this one is built in the heart of Tokyo when everything is going on. I thought the story, it was really emotional, and everything that was going on is like, it's the final blow. We have to go and defeat him one final time and end everything. Our lives are on the line, everything's on the line, everything just needs to work out. Honestly, this is my personal thoughts and opinion on this. I don't believe that this dungeon should have existed the way that it was. I actually don't believe that Yaldabaoth should have been in this game at all, because every game has a god, and it's just tiring. I like the idea of having a god kind of like in between and everything like that, but the build up until Shido kind of makes sense, but then adding another bad guy on top of that one, it drags in the story. It doesn't feel satisfying enough in that sense, especially when the dungeon feels lazily made. The dungeon where you go and fight Yaldabaoth, the second dungeon, it feels really lazy and honestly very uninteresting. In that aspect, it should have not been a dungeon at all. You can just walk up to him and fight him again. That could have been much easier. It would have saved time. It would have just allowed you to continue with the story forward, and it just thematically just makes more sense than having to build another lazy dungeon for no reason other than just go and fight him again. You can totally fight me on this one. I'll own up to it if you disagree on this one. Story music wise, I think it was okay music. There's a lot of tension involved in this one. Again, with your lives being on the line and everything, the stakes were risen to a really tough spot where you really have to save the world and everything. So it's in a completely different tier and everything like that. So we reached to the last dungeon, Maruki's dungeon, the brand new dungeon in the story of Persona 5 Royal. And before we actually even talk about this dungeon, I want to talk about how interesting that you actually see this dungeon much earlier in the story. You actually see him midway through the story. You enter with Kasumi, where she awakens her powers for the first time, and you are really left behind as far as like, wait a minute, like, are we not gonna take care of this dungeon and everything? Morgana's like, no, don't worry about it. It's not important. A lot of people have dungeons or passes and everything like that. Left behind, never really touched a subject on that until the third semester, which is relevant to the story and what's going on and everything. I really like this dungeon because it has a really interesting build up, and it has a really interesting turnarounds to and shock surprise, shock value is important in this puzzle, in this game particularly. Especially when you go to this dungeon, you discover that this is actually Maruki's palace. Your counselor, the person that you've been trusting your secrets to, the person you've actually been talking to and everything like that. It's almost like a betrayal, but you actually kind of want to know what's going on with him and everything. This dungeon is also very different from other dungeons because, well, one, it is a little bit long and there's a lot of aspects that kind of make it maybe even shorter than some other dungeons. This one, what it does is builds the character of Maruki through these recordings, where you kind of start to slowly to see how he became the way that he did. And I thought it was a very interesting one per se, because it does kind of build up to that aspect, but also because it's just so cool to see. Oh, not cool in the cool aspect, but cool is in the interesting aspect to see him evolve and see how much he suffered, how much pain he gone through. Because when you reach to that spot where you kind of have to agree or disagree with him, you can no longer just say, hey dude, this is bad, because you do feel for him, you feel for his story, you see Kazumi's or Sumira's story, and you kind of know what's going on behind the scenes and everything. Really made this character not only empathetic but also really well written character. I feel like this dungeon did so much for the character of Maruki and Kazumi, and they built these characters in a whole other layer than all the other palaces. If I could rate this higher than this, I probably would, because I really like this palace a lot. I think that this palace builds a lot of stuff. Music is really good, it's interesting too, it doesn't get tiring. There are some puzzles here, and some of them can be tiring and kind of a little bit boring, but I think that the puzzles make sense within the aspects of being in an observatory, which is kind of like a science office of the sort. I don't know what the word for it is particularly. This is definitely supposed to be some kind of laboratory of the sorts to study something, and I really like that. You know, it shows thematically speaking, when it comes to Maruki and their story background with Joker and everybody, story wise it makes sense and everything. So I like this one a lot. I thought that it was really creative, really interesting. There's a lot of different aspects that make you think about your decisions in the game, and I really like the way that they handcrafted this dungeon. Therefore, I'm going to put this one as an S. I really like this one as well. I think this was pretty good. I'm actually going to move this one from a B to a C as well. This one is the other Mementos. I do think that after ranking all of them, I do feel like that one I'll probably rate a little bit higher in the scale. Anyway, that is pretty much here, guys. This is a long video. I actually stopped doing long videos a while ago because people don't watch them all the way to the end, but I feel like this one was just one that kind of needed to happen. I think that this video was extensive and needed. It was a really needed video. Been trying to do this one for a while, but I think that going through every dungeon and dissecting them and talking about them is something cool that I want to do. Anyway, that is pretty much it for today, guys. If you're new, please consider liking and subscribing, and that's it for today, guys. I'll see you guys next time.